Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. I'm your host, Sangela Jane, and this is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling.
I got really great advice from actually an advisor, an investor who said, you're not wrong, you're just early. And there was something about that, and that's something that I carry with me now. I'm wrong sometimes, but I'm often not wrong in the conviction and in what I know to be a problem. I'm just early. And so for the women of color who are considering jumping into a system or jumping into an industry that wasn't created or designed for our full participation, right? I'd say do whatever you can to stay the course.
There are leaders everywhere, even the ones who aren't elected, who don't sit in the C-suite, right? And among those leaders, of which I consider myself a part, you have a tremendous amount of power and responsibility to determine whose voices are heard, what stories are told, what kinds of momentum is created behind different decisions, what kind of creativity and systems support those policy decisions.
Listen, but I think more importantly, to listen with humility. And I'll tell you, I actually started to learn that from my patients even before the crisis. But over the course of all of these years, even into today, I find that if I can listen with humility and be honest about that, be honest about my own where my knowledge begins and ends, that people are then even more forthcoming. It's a trust building exercise, I guess, maybe at the root. And in medicine, trust is like job one, right? I mean, if you don't trust me as your doctor, we're not going to get very far together in your health and your health outcomes. And so a lot of my patients really help me understand about listening.
So my encouragement is to women who are in technology or women who are in anything is to, really believe in yourself and follow your intuition about what is right for you at that stage in your life when you have to make a big decision, despite what the risks are, because your intuition will guide you to what is right for you if you can listen to that. And then also just to really believe in your ability to win and your ability to do it with the professional skills and experiences that you bring with you. Your life circumstances will change, but what you know and how you do what you do, you bring that doesn't go away. People can't take that from you, and life can't take that from you.
When I was coming up in the law firm environment, I think every advice you gave was like seen as having to be just essentially perfect, basically. Like if you don't, before you write an email, before you ever advise a client, if you haven't done like 5 to 10 hours of work checking into it, then you haven't done it right. And I'd say it took me probably almost a decade to unlearn that and to say sometimes you can just, one, you can make mistakes and you have to own the mistakes. But I think if you own those mistakes, people understand. And two, I do have, at some point, you have the experience and you have the knowledge to be able to advise without doing hours and hours of work. And you should always do your research and you should always do work. But this idea that everything that you say and everything you write down has to be absolutely perfect and unimpeachable, I think just, can paralyze people.
The thing is, I think people used to think, well, there's quality and then there's health equity. And I think what this has shown us is that they're really not to be separated, that health equity is the path forward on quality, that if you close those gaps, you're going to have the biggest impact on quality.
Behavioral health is on the mind of everyone now, which is great, and I hope continues. I think a lot of what has fed into that is consumer sentiment, this next generation. I mean, there's still stigma, don't get me wrong, but particularly around mild to moderate anxiety, depression. Next generation is absolutely more comfortable talking about mental health. And as they have begun to enter the workplace, they even expect those kinds of benefits to be there. And so I do see a lot of employers investing in digital behavioral health solutions as a result.
One of the things about me and probably a bit pathological about me is that when people tell me I can't do something, I say, "Oh yeah, watch me, I will." For better or for worse, I'll decide if you think that I can't do this, I'll show you, I'll prove you wrong. And luckily, that's led me down some really great paths.
The academic calendar starts before July 1st. So I was welcoming new residents to the organization. And on the slide, I put the almost dean for medical education because I'm not the dean for medical education. And I was like, well, here we go. If you're nervous, think about how I feel. And so I think it's good to have that human quality to it so people understand that you yourself are a work in progress.
Anyone that I've ever worked with would not say that I suffer from confidence or that, but there's something to the role and the title that can that you just need to be mindful of as you settle in, and you just sort of continue to be you, because that's why you were hired. That's why I was picked for the role.
I do find that the double whammy of being a woman and a woman of color at the same time, it just pronounces people's biases even more. They get a sense of, who they think you are. If I disagree with you, what biases do you have about, an assertive Black woman speaking to you? Do you think that this is a tantrum? Do you think that I'm angry? What do you think this is?
Even before I knew the term social determinants of health, I knew in my bones that if you were a person of color, that there was a chance that you were not getting the same access to healthcare, and that there were social factors. Before I had the words, I saw it in my friends and in my neighbors.
I think as a woman, when you are assertive and when you're tough, it's perceived differently than when you're a man. So I think when you're a man and you're assertive and you're tough, people think, wow, they're really a strong leader. And when you're a woman, it's kind of like, well, she's just mean. And it was actually some feedback I got in the first 360 review, not as CEO, but before I was CEO, about, it was like, she doesn't listen to what people have to say, and she's, too assertive. And I had to think about that a lot, because my first reaction was, this isn't true. This isn't accurate. And I had to really humble myself a little bit.
We're seeing slowly chipping away these systemic barriers that exist, because people who think the problem is them are now realizing the problem isn't exactly them. The problem is exactly the system, and they need to figure out how to fix that. And so it's a really cool opportunity and experience for me to see all of these incredible women who have faced challenges across the country now come together and come up with solutions together as to how each of their organizations and institutions can address these problems.
I see a lot of people who identify as women feeling like their personal worth is tied to work and judgments from work and external approval. And, that is, it's so deeply ingrained. It's really hard to beat out of yourself. But quite frankly, if you're going to do a job like being an emergency physician, people sometimes are not going to like you, and if you're going to be a leader in any space, people are just not going to like you sometimes. And, that's got to be okay. It's got to be okay.
Racism and addressing racism is a core and fundamental requirement for health equity work, right? If you want to, skip around, and if you want to walk around the perimeter of that, and you don't want to speak about it head on, and not just speak about it, but actually work to deconstruct it, you are not doing health equity work.
Public health is by definition invisible because it's about prevention, because you have prevented something from happening. But there is a real cost when the important work that you do is invisible, because then it becomes the first thing on the chopping block when it comes to budget time.
Anytime you innovate, if your palms aren't sweaty at least once or twice, you're probably not innovating. And you're probably going to have a good conversation here or there. Even when you upstream outline roles and responsibilities, When you get into the thick of actual execution, sometimes those things still have to be worked through. And I think that's where trust comes into play.
Medicare Advantage now, increasingly, about 35% of plans nationally also cover transportation. And I think we're going to see that increase more and more as people recognize the importance of social determinants of health in our healthcare ecosystem.
In the 21st century, I think data is the oil of our economy, and that how we use data and how we understand to take this incredible volume of information in and then leverage it to change what we do is the task that we have ahead of us. And so as we were thinking about what was going on, just kind of, we always are sensing what's going on, since Ebola, we've learned you have to pay attention beyond your own borders. So we knew this virus was circulating over in China. And when we got a patient who said, I came from Wuhan, China, so and I have a fever and a cough, we knew to be ready for it. But by the next day, we were able to turn on an alert in our electronic medical record across 51 hospitals, across 7 states, across 1,000 medical clinics that said, screen everybody for travel. Right. So as soon as that hit, we were able to put our contingency plans in place that this might be something big.
Being grounded in science. And so, especially for healthcare type features, making sure that the work, there's no shortcuts around doing good work, right? So, and that's true for the science, and making sure that you take the time to do the feasibility and understand the impact of the technology, both scientifically as well as on a user's life. And thinking about it from both of those perspectives, I think is really important. And I think that, the thing, you always think about the design and the focus on design at Apple, and that is something that is astounding and amazing. And it's in everything we do, where it's focusing, simplify, think of, surprise and delight is a really important element in terms of how our features and products are developed. But the thing that I always am in awe of is the attention to detail around the science behind the feature, so that you need to, fundamentally, the science and the technology has to be solid. And that's when you have a really great user experience. So I think the biggest thing to take away for healthcare is go back to the fundamentals and remember what's the core of what you're trying to deliver.
The challenge is, how do we marry that accelerated pace of change with, as you say, the culture of healthcare, which is very risk averse and has generally been pretty slow to adopt new innovations and new change. And I think one of the things that's really enabled that to happen, or that is going to continue to enable it to happen, is the COVID pandemic. I think with pandemic, we saw that all those telehealth barriers that for years were really holding us back just fell literally overnight. And I think people are seeing also with just the economic impact of COVID on our healthcare system and on our economy, we have to figure out solutions faster. So even though my book is called The Long Fix, I named it before the COVID pandemic. Now I think it's the not so long, it's probably a quicker fix, because I think we all understand that there's a lot more urgency. And if the digital health and health tech and other industries that are coming into healthcare can help facilitate that acceleration, I think all the better.
I've seen so many interesting and good ideas die because nobody was the cheerleader or the champion of that. And in the end, if that's something that you truly believe in, that can change the way in which we work, can change and impact a patient's life, you've got to have someone who's going to be willing to champion that. And I found that if you do, and you are persistent, you'll find a way to bring it through. There's many times in which, Pfizer's a big company, to be able to bring that level of change, gosh, can that really be done? It can be done. You just got to be passionate and persistent.
But we strongly believe that successful innovation depends on our ability to build and form partnerships and coalitions and cross-industry collaborations. But for innovation to be successful, we need to overcome systemic barriers to care, such as health disparities due to social determinants of health and issues with access to care, by marrying social community services with medical care, and to find innovative ways of how we can do that.
I just do my best. I think the first thing, as any mom, we carry a lot of guilt no matter what. And I think even if I wasn't doing half the things I'm doing, I would still feel just as guilty. So I think number one, being gentle with yourself. I think that's also something we've learned in this pandemic is to really be gentle with ourselves, put on the oxygen mask, because if you don't, again, all the folks that depend on you really do suffer. The other thing I would just say is that, and this actually comes from my mom, is, she would always tell me that you can't do everything all the time. You just can't be the best at everything all the time. There will be days when you're a better mom than you are a doc, and there will be days when you're a better executive than you are a mom. And she, she kind of reminded me that that's par for the course.
We need to be intentional about cultivating our families, and we have to do that starting very early. And so that can look like egg freezing, it can look like embryo freezing, it can look like having kids during medical school, it can look like having kids during residency or fellowship, it can look any number of ways depending on what people want. But we need to really think about it and make it happen the way that we want it to, because no one will help us do that, really. And we're hoping to change that, but for now, that's how it is.
That time of being like 6 weeks pregnant and closing a series A, and it's that weird window where no one really tells anyone yet, and you're kind of like feeling things out, like what's going to happen, and continuing to progress in the pregnancy positively, and feeling like I have to tell Bob and Brian that this other thing is coming, and of course it probably felt like a bigger deal to me than it did them. It's been really challenging when I've been kind of Googling around, like, founder, CEO, maternity leave. There's a couple instances, right? I think we saw with the Bumble IPO, and that CEO having, her child as part of that experience, which was really beautiful. There's a few, cases like that exist, and experiences that exist, but it's something that there's not a cookie cutter approach to it, and this is kind of create your own adventure.
I didn't know all the obstacles. I didn't count all the no's I would have gotten, and also in hindsight, I didn't know all the challenges I will have. So all I focused is this is the next step. I need to get this done and do it. And it might be risky. If we start to think about the perfect timing, often we probably just won't make the first step. I give you the example is, as I think whether or not to have a second child, I start to get to the mode, keep thinking, and then realize there's never gonna be a time that I feel I'm ready, right? If I had the same thought, I probably would not have had my son, which would be the worst decision I've ever made in my life. And if I thought rationally at the time, I might get to the conclusion, say, there's no way I can do both. But somehow, when you are in the position, many of us would underestimate what we're capable of doing. You will rise to the occasion, and you will have people around you support you and get you there. So don't overthink about it, and lean in before you step back.
We would love for all medical students who want to freeze their eggs to have that ability, but if the insurance doesn't cover it, then we're essentially saying, hey, here's something you can physically do to try and ameliorate this problem, but you may not be able to afford it because you're also taking out loans to pay for medical school, and then you're going to be in residency and not making a very big salary either. And so we really advocate for the system to recognize that this is important. This is medical care. If it's going to cover blood pressure medications for hypertension and cholesterol medications for high cholesterol, then the system should be also covering fertility treatments for those who want to preserve or, make changes in their fertility prospects.
When I started working and I became a mother, it was very eye-opening to me that I was falling in the same pattern. I was doing the same things that my mother did. I was carrying all the weight alone, right? Wanting to get up, having to be a perfect mother, cook like a perfect meal, go to work, put in 10 hours, come back home, do it all. So for me, I think the big realization was that if I do really want equality at work, and if I really wanted to be changing for women, I have to start at home first. And so it was a very honest conversation with my husband to say, how are we going to do this?